Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. I'm your host, George Aldridge, and tonight, this morning, whenever you are watching this, I am going to be discussing a very, very anticipated TV series. This is, of course, the third season of Netflix's Drive to Survive, the documentary series on Formula One. Very difficult to talk about documentaries in truth, especially one that's based on the previous year of sport that we've all seen. Actually, that's a very good intro point. I want you guys at home to comment alongside because I've got a very unique situation. I can approach this video, this review, as a Formula One fan, which is something I've been watching for almost 15 years now. And I can also approach this as, very much that sort of film TV mindset of editing and all that stuff. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be doing a sort of cross combination. And this is why it's intriguing. If anyone saw that Pele review recently, that was very similar, very difficult to discuss, especially when it's not something, not necessarily you've lived through, but it's something very different. So I want you guys to comment along today with all your thoughts on Drive to Survive Season 1 and 2. Now, as I mentioned, this is based off last year's sport. So when I say there's going to be spoilers, there's not going to be individual spoilers related to this is what Guenther said, this is what they said. However, I will be talking about the season, some of the major incidents, i.e. Lewis Hamilton winning the 7th World Championship, Grosjean's crash, which I will be speaking about, and a couple of the driver changes. So if you don't know anything about Formula One, and you don't even know the events of the actual racing from last year, then still maybe check around. You would have had them on the news, no doubt. But if you are a massive F1 fan, if you're there expecting me to say, Guenther said this, or what does Christian Horner get up to? Is being a snake again? I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to save that for you guys at home because this is a show that, as an F1 community, we all love. This has changed everything. And before I actually get into some of the reasons of that, I'm actually going to quickly bring up our socials. If you are new to our channel, then go find us at Facebook, Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and we have a link to TeePublic in the description below. So do check those out. Going back to the core of it, Drive to Survive. The first season, I think a lot of people were similar. They thought, is this show going to work? F1's very much been, I don't even want to say up its own arse for many decades. It's always been Bernie Ecclestone's thing, hasn't it? It's very outdated, how it presents itself to the world. And when obviously it was bought out, one of the first things they said was we're going to commercialize it. I remember that new logo and I was disgusted, and like everyone else, you're absolutely fine with it a year later. But when they announced this series, I was quite worried, in all honesty. I thought, okay, is they just going to be doing a false presentation of what we've seen over the last year? How is it going to play? And I think a lot of F1 fans had that opinion. And what I also think is a lot of teams had that opinion too, because if you can cast your mind back to season 1, there was no Mercedes or Ferrari specials. Hamilton was barely in it, to say it lightly. Ferrari drivers weren't in it. It was a very different season in season 1. And here we are in season 3, because I'm going to get into now the Corona season, we'll call it, the insane season. And episode 1 picks off right there. From what we'll remember a year ago today, this review comes up, is the actual date that the Australia Grand Prix, I think, either it went ahead or the day they landed, and it was cancelled the following day. So it's quite insane thinking about that's already been a year ago. It's been a ridiculous year, to say it lightly, but I think that's a really big thing for the series. A lot of you at home are going to be wondering, how was their approach to COVID? How did they handle those sort of 3-4 months where we didn't get racing at the catastrophe? I'm going to say that episode is one of my favourites. However, one of my big issues with the series is that COVID, not forgotten about it, it's constantly there. They speak about how difficult the year is, but I'd have liked to have seen more in the at-home period between drivers, between teams. Now, granted, there's a pandemic on. I'm not saying you need a Netflix crew to turn up someone's house. Absolutely not. And maybe that could be a reason why. But certainly, as a fan of the sport, wanting to find out more about what went on in those months, that is something that this series doesn't deliver on, and it didn't need to. But I think that's such a big gap for people at home who don't know that stuff. They're going to see the calendar go from March to June via a passing conversation. And I can understand both the pros and cons of that. So that is something I need to bring. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about that. But as a whole, the series is phenomenal. Once again, you're getting this undocumented access to stuff we've not seen before. We get more of the drivers' market. We get the switcheroos that happened last season, all in that COVID period. We get how Ferrari handled Vettel. We get how Vettel is across the season. Very interesting driver. I'm not going to give my thoughts on all the drivers, the pros and cons of them. But Vettel's someone, as I've got a lot older, I've respected a lot more. And he's wonderful in this. And kind of talking about the drivers as a whole, actually, speaking of the teams, what's nice is that the more respect this series gets, or more of an irritance, or the bigger the series gets, depends whatever Carey wants to put onto the teams. Of course, there's a bigger presence amongst the paddock. There's more specials. We're not getting more episodes, but it's very much Netflix's here. I remember you guys last year when they were covering Grand Prix and everyone's like, oh, Netflix are at Mercedes this weekend, Netflix are at these guys this weekend. And not that we can see it coming, but we kind of have a sense of, okay, if they're going to be covering them, then that's something we can look forward to or something we think is going to go ahead. We all knew about Germany from season 2 that we knew that was going to be covered. So it's one of them where I think if you're really into the sport, it's always been a fascinating intake. But the big thing with the series that a lot of people don't know, this isn't designed for fans of the sport. I know this sounds outrageous, but the big problem with Formula One has been how enclosed it is, how you're either sort of in F1 and you know F1, or you're an outsider and you're not getting in. And what this has done is by commercializing it via the series, I don't need to tell you who Guenther Steiner is. Maybe 2 years ago you didn't know who he was or something, but this has opened the doors for people at home to get a further insight into the sport, and there are now fans coming into the sport because of shows like this. And I think that's where you have to take your hat off to Netflix. Yes, of course, you've still got some of those issues where scenes are edited for dramatic effect, and you need to expect that. That's me looking at this as someone that's reviewing this as a sort of TV series. You can't just have this really boring A to B to C. You cannot have that. You need to be able to cover this series for a way where people that maybe don't know the sport or don't watch it weekly have a really nice entry point and they can carry on the story. And I think that's what Netflix have handled really well. But to me, as a Formula One fan, it is a bonus. I'm not aggrieved that they might edit someone's team radio for something happened a lap before, or when you get race highlights, it's 20 seconds and they show an overtake battle in 10 seconds that we know went on for 4 laps. I can let stuff like that slide. And I think that is a big thing, that we watch those races. We watch that live. We know that it's an hour and a half at a time sometimes to watch these races. And it's not easy, but they need to compensate this for the other viewers who don't have that knowledge, who aren't watching every Sunday, who aren't getting up at 6 in the morning for Grand Prix or staying up till 8 at night. I don't know. It depends what country. And Grand Prix is all at ridiculous time. So that's something I really needed to hit home, is that the series caters to both the fans still and that. However, turning to season 3, I've got to bring my biggest negative. And I think it's just something a lot of you fans at home will want to know about as well. I really dislike how they handled the Grosjean crash. I'm not going to go into absolute specifics of it. I want you guys to be able to watch that at home. Of course, we know the episode's coming. It has an episode almost dedicated to it. And obviously, we know how terrible that crash was. And I think as a Formula 1 fan that weekend, that was a very somber emotion for a lot of people. A lot of channels that I watched content from as well. There was just this quiet atmosphere after that race, but it wasn't, people didn't care that race. The only thing you want to know is that Grosjean was okay, and we know he was okay. My issue with Netflix in this series, I don't mind saying this at all, is that they do go for the dramatic effect of it. And yes, you do need to cover that. It's a very, very touching subject. That obviously the series is called Drive to Survive, and this has been the worst crash in many, many years. For me, maybe it's the worst crash I've seen since Webber went through the barriers and somehow got out absolutely fine when he went up in Valencia. My issue with this is that they show the crash, and I don't know if anyone saw the team radio at the time. It shows all the drivers' team radio. But what they don't show you is Grosjean getting out for about 5 minutes. And this is where I've really struck a nerve with the series for me. And I love this show. So I can let editing pass, I can let dramatic effect pass. But what I can't have is them having a 5-minute segment not showing Grosjean get out of that car to then make out it's a miracle he got out. We bloody know it's a miracle he got out of that car. And it's a miracle he got out of that car down to the safety of the sport. My issue with this series and this episode is that, and this is a big thing for me because I have a horrible sting in my mouth. It's one of the later episodes. It's, of course, it's at Bahrain. It doesn't, not even go into it. It doesn't talk about that safety stuff. You get a passing conversation, but it's like, oh, it's a miracle. It's this, it's that. And they went back to racing and they're like, no. Like, we should have got an undocumented version of that. We can maybe have them explaining the devices in the car that allowed him to survive. And that's what's really lost me. The Grosjean stuff. I know this sounds negative. I adore this show. I had a wonderful time binging it. But that left a really big worry on me. And I think when the series comes out, there'll be a lot of F1 fans that do have that. And I said the main thing is that Grosjean is okay. We get some really nice things of him and his wife. Of course, get the behind the scenes the following week when he came back to Bahrain, which is still one of the most touching moments of the season, in truth. And that is greatly presented. But it's just that those 5 minutes there are such a horrible come down. And it's the first time Netflix had to be tested to cover something like that. And that's, again, something I'm not okay with. And I think that's something that a lot of people will take up issues with. Leaving that aside, A lot of it is great. Everything else is pretty much great. I'm actually going to really quickly speak about some of the drivers for you guys at home. I don't know if there's any fans watching it. You want to know all, my favorites Russell, my favorites Max, my favorites Perez, loads of them. I'm going to really briefly run through some of the names who basically get no mention at all. So if you're a fan of these people, prepare yourself for disappointment. We basically get nothing from Max Verstappen, which I'm very aware of he doesn't like the show. No issue there. We get nothing from George Russell, including the Mercedes race weekend. Maybe Mercedes wanted to protect him. Maybe they didn't want that documented, but I thought we'd have got something on that. We don't get to see either the return of Hulkenberg. Again, maybe that's not something they wanted to do. Maybe it's too early. And, Williams, nothing at all for the team, for the drivers. If you didn't know F1, you wouldn't even know who Latifi is. I don't think his name is mentioned once. I think Fittipaldi gets one mention and Latifi absolutely nothing. So that's something to take into account, that this does compensate for a lot of you. You've got the stars, I guess we can say, from Series 1, who are the immediate legends that have been on the show. You've got Danny Ricciardo, you've got Guenther Steiner, Christian Horner. I wouldn't say he's a legend of the show, but he was very much this sort of villain figure, where I think one of my friends said a really good analogy that he's kind of this Bond villain in the first few seasons, and I kind of see that. However, if you want to sort of Bond villains, then Lawrence Stroll has changed the F1 documentary game. Any of the Racing Point episodes, whenever they follow him, I don't know if it's in his contract that he must be presented as a Bond villain, but it's just this ridiculous big persona that everyone's scared of, everyone's shitting them off. And it's quite amazing watching it, because I love all that stuff behind the scenes, all the managers teaming up together to say, we don't agree with this, it's the pink Mercedes. And you get all that beautiful stuff that we want to see, the stuff that is interesting, that is behind the scenes that we don't see much of. But when they're presented as that cartoon-esque character, it's very funny. It's not demeaning at all, because you can tell Lawrence Stroll loves it as well. If anyone saw his famous rant last year, he did. They build up to that for 5 minutes. They use super slow-mo shots of him walking around with his team. It's amazing seeing this stuff. So absolutely hats off to Netflix for once again doing the whole hero-villain dynamic. I like that kind of stuff, and that's what separates this show from boring documentaries, from season, because this could be a season review, but it's not. It goes into other things. And I also want to mention actually briefly as well with Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't get massive amounts of coverage. Mercedes is mainly focused on Bottas. However, we do get some of the really important stuff of Lewis Hamilton, how he's talking about change in Formula One. We get to see some footage of him when he's young. You've not seen it before. It's right at the end, and I thought that's something I really disliked. But when I finished it, I was like, you know what? It was more powerful to have that moment at the end, to have the record breaker, have the last few minutes of the series to discuss these issues, because these are issues that are deeply prevailing within F1. And this documentary's responsibility to look at the season as a whole, it needed to include that. I don't think there's enough on it. I will say that in truth. I know it caused issues behind the scenes. I'm not going to get into a debate of what side you're on, yes or no, should you know or should you not. I'm not here for that. Obviously, I'm on Lewis's side. He's my favourite driver. But I thought they could have dedicated maybe a little bit more time for that. However, the time they do dedicate to it is very powerful, very hard-hitting. So that was a big sort of thing that I've sort of slept on, I've thought more about, and that is a positive. So it is one of those where, looking at it as a whole, it is a wonderful series. It is amazing to see it carry on. You can only be excited for season 4. There are a couple of missed opportunities, again, talking that health and safety, talking about that gap in between the COVID. But if you're in to see your favourite drivers, if you're in to see the drama, the behind-the-scenes gossip, of course this show is going to hit home for you. And I do think this is the best season by a country mile. I always thought season 1 was a great introduction. It was that this show can work. Now we're going to get it moving. Season 2 was great. It came to its own. Season 3 is just pushed it to the next level for me. So when this does come out on the 19th of March, get yourself onto Netflix, get yourself on all 10 episodes. If you haven't seen season 1 and 2, you've still got a week to do it. It's going to be very busy next week, because not only do we have Drive to Survive coming out, this is where I'm going to transform back into the film stuff. There's going to be the Snyder Cut coming out next Thursday. Next Friday, we have The Falcon and the Winter Soldier starting up on the channel. They're going to be every Friday from the 19th of March. And we also have the Infinity Saga retrospective, which is every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So if you guys are new to the channel, if you don't know what we do, of course, a film channel, we mainly review films, do discussions, stuff like that. We're halfway through, or not halfway through, in recording, we're halfway through an insane Infinity War. So if you like your Marvel stuff, come and join us for that. If you like F1, of course, we've covered Drive to Survive. But if you want to know some more about Drive to Survive, if you want to chat some other thoughts, again, I'm not doing spoilers, Hit us up on our social media. We reply to all comments. We'll reply to comments on the channel. That's Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at cinema_savvy, letterboxd.com, and we have a link to TeePublic below. But I want you guys to comment your thoughts on the first 2 seasons of Drive to Survive. Also, we don't get to talk F1 much on the channel. Let me know some of your favourite drivers. Let me know some of your favourite teams, your history of the sport, how long you watched it for. There's not many great F1 films, but in my top 10 of all time is Rush. So if you want to start up an F1 conversation, just comment below. We reply to all comments on the channel, so do that. And as I said, we've got plenty of other videos coming your way across the next few weeks, so do join us for those. It's been amazing to chat Formula One. I know it's not live. I know this is pre-recorded. I'm very excited to see what the F1 community thinks of this series once it airs. I'm excited to see what people do like, what people dislike. And for the Tifosi out there, all I'm going to say is episode 4 is the episode you're looking forward to. And I shall leave it at that. Thank you all for watching.